Welcome to the continuing part of chapter 12, which is the discussion on counseling. If you remember, in the last session we discussed about what is stress, what are the different types of stressors, why a person perceives stress in the organization and also in his or her life, and what an organization can do to either prevent stress or to manage stress faced by individuals within the organization. And as one of the important ways of managing stress in the organization is through the process of counseling. So, in this discussion we are going to know what is employee counseling, what are the why it is required in an organization, and what are the different types of counseling, and especially what are the do's and don'ts of counseling, which is really very important discussion, like what we can do and what we can't do while counseling people. So, we will start with the definition of what is employee counseling. So, counseling is a process through which one person helps another by purposeful conversation in an understanding atmosphere. It seeks to establish a helping relationship in which the one counseled can express their thoughts and feelings in such a way as to clarify their own situation, come to terms with some new experience, see their difficulty more objectively, and so face their problem with less anxiety and tension. So, if we can analyze this whole definition, so what we find, like counseling is done maybe in a very close situation when one person tries to counsel another person, and it is a purposeful interaction, purposeful conversation between two people in an understanding atmosphere. So, when we are talking of an understanding atmosphere, it means like there is a level of trust between the counselor and the counselee. This is very important. Like if the counselee doesn't trust the counselor and feels like that the counselor is the person who can help him or her to get out of the particular problem that he or she is facing at that point in life, or he or she can trust the counselor with the confidentiality of the things that he shares or she shares about his or her life to the counselor, then if this trust and understanding is not there, then the whole process of counseling cannot proceed. So, it is very important to have an understanding between the counselor and the counselee. So, it is a purposeful conversation in an understanding atmosphere. When you are talking of, then what is the purpose? The purpose is of course to help the counselee to come out of certain problems faced by the counselee at that particular point in life, and to maybe interpret the situation in a new light, experience new ways of looking at things, or looking at the problems faced at life more objectively, and develop the ability to face the problems maybe with less tension and anxiety. So, the basic purpose of counseling is to assist the individual to make their own decision from among the choices available to them. So, the word over here assist is very important. So, what the counselor does is to help the counselee to make his or her own decisions out of several alternatives present in front of the counselee in alternative paths. It may be that before coming to the counseling situation, the alternatives were there, but the person, the counselee, was not able to make the proper choice. And what the counselor does is to assist that person, help him or her become more equipped to make the own decisional choices. What is employee counseling? Employee counseling can be explained as providing help and support to the employees to face and sail through the difficult times in life. Counseling is guiding, consoling, advising and sharing and helping to resolve their problems whenever the need arises. Counseling is discussion of an employee's problem that usually has an emotional content to it in order to help the employee cope with the situation better. So, we find like it is a wellness program, it is a part of the well-being or program designed by the organization, which takes care of the quality of work life of the individuals within the organization. What happens? So, through the process of counseling in the organization, its guidance is given to the individual how to face problems in life, maybe some also emotional comfort in the form of consoling is given, then proper advice is also given in how to make better choices about from the alternatives which are there in front of the individuals. And it is about also sharing some facts of life which are like very maybe private things and which the employee may not even share with friends and supervisors. So, this is an avenue provided by the organization where employees can come and speak up their mind, and as a result, so it provides a buffer for them as an emotional support. So, again what is very much required for this is the atmosphere of understanding, trustworthiness of the counselor to the counselee. Some of the signs of a troubled employee may include like sudden change in behavior, then preoccupation, irritability, increased accidents, increased fatigue, excessive drinking, reduced production, waste, difficulty in absorbing training. Now, if all these problems are seen in the employee, then it is time for that person to come for counseling. Otherwise, these problems may result in stress or are the resultant of stress and may lead to, if it is allowed to be within the individual, or if the individual is allowed to carry on with this behavior, may sometimes lead to serious outcomes in the form of like absenteeism or accidents or depression or all these things, which may ultimately again lead to like loss of production for the organization. So, because it may lead to long term cost for the organization in terms of the financial cost and also cost for like dealing with the medicals and all these things. So, it's very important like this, whenever these symptoms are seen, whenever these signs are evident. So, the employee a particular employee should be encouraged to go for a counseling session. The benefits of counseling are, it helps to understand self properly, it helps in making impersonal decisions, setting achievable goals which enhance growth, planning in the present to bring about desired future, effective solutions to personal and interpersonal problems, coping with difficult situations, controlling self-defeating emotions, acquiring effective transaction skills, acquiring positive self-regard and a sense of optimism about one's ability to satisfy one's basic needs. So, what you can see over here is counseling not only helps people to come out of problematic situations which they face in their life, but counseling also helps to increase your self esteem, a proper understanding of self. It makes you more equipped to face situations. It helps you to make proper decisions in your life. It leads to a holistic development of the individual, and it increases your common transaction skills, and it increases your sense of self regard within the individual, and like a sense of like increasing the self efficacy, like the person will be able to answer to the needs of his own needs and maybe his family needs and ultimately to the needs of the organization. So, it increases also the self regard of the person. So, it is not only that when we face some problems in life, but in other situations also it helps us. The process of counseling helps a person to grow emotionally, psychologically and socially also. Two skills which are very basic for counseling are active listening and messaging. Active listening is one of the very important skills of counseling, and it is divided into two forms of behavior. One is verbal, and so these two forms are verbal and non-verbal. In verbal behavior, it's more complex form of active listening than non-verbal component, because here we have to ask like guiding questions, open-ended guiding questions, and which will help the counselee to reflect on certain facts in his or her life. So, it is very important to know which question to ask when and how to ask it. Active nonverbal behaviors include making eye contact, maintaining an interested facial expression, nodding, facing the other person, maintaining an open position, that is not crossed legs and crossed arms, because that is a body posture which reflects like very closed, like this type of things will represent a very closed, like I am not ready to listen to what you are sharing with me. So, it is open posture like with open arms and legs, these are accepting body postures. Next is maintaining an attentive posture, keeping a close proximity. These are like good points, active nonverbal behavior points, which are not to be done sort of thing in active listening. Active nonverbal listening is while somebody is speaking, we should not frequently check the watch, or we should not be playing with certain small things, and we should not be sighing. These type of things are not done, like foot tapping, and also like listening to loud music and other conversations in a word which shows like certain nonverbal cues, which shows like I am not interested in what you are telling, or I want this conversation to end very soon. If that things are reflected through the nonverbal cues, like whatever we have told now, then it is not proper as an active nonverbal behavior for listening. The different types of counseling processes in the organization are Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic therapy, Carl Rogers' client-centered therapy, Karpov model of personal counseling, Gestalt approach to counseling, rational emotive behavior therapy by Albert Ellis. Before discussing into these ethical principles of counseling, we will try to discuss some of the like a bit of these counseling processes. Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic therapy is based on the power of unconscious, is based on the power of unconscious mind. According to Freud, as we have already discussed while we were discussing personality, the mind is divided into layers of unconscious, preconscious and conscious, and also it consists of three portions like id, ego and superego. Id is the storehouse of unconscious desires which are more or less socially not acceptable, and superego is the conscience and the voice of the society which tells about the behaviors which are either socially acceptable or not acceptable. And ego again tries to make a balance between the pleasure desires of id and what the superego tells, like these cannot be those desires which cannot be met because it is not socially sanctioned. So, what these may give rise the constant oppositely acting forces between id and superego, and ego trying to keep a balance between these two factors may lead to certain tensions for the ego, and it may take certain defense mechanisms which are called ego defense mechanisms. So, what psychoanalytic techniques tries to do is it tries to tap the conscious, semi-conscious and unconscious part of the mind through different techniques like dream analysis, and there are other techniques also, but and tries to get account of what is that which is suppressed very deep in, which is put very deep in the unconscious layer, and which comes out, and the reflections of it are seen in the conscious level and could be problematic for the individual. But one word of caution over here is it should be practiced only by individuals who know how to practice the psychoanalytic therapy and who have themselves undergone a training for it. It should not be practiced by people without any proper training. Next, when we are talking of Carl Rogers client centered therapy, it is told like the difference with Freud's perspective over here, where the counselee in Freud's perspective plays a very passive role to be guided by the counselor about how to view things in life and what what is to be done as a proper behavior. In contrast to that, when you are talking of Carl Rogers way of counseling, it is called client centered therapy. So, in client centered therapy, the counselees are addressed as clients, and what is done is, like in this therapy, the client plays a more active role and as compared to the counselor, and counselor plays a role more of assisting the counselee or the client to make some major choices and decisions in his or her life. So, it's just like the helping the counselee to find the right way of doing things and make proper choices. When we are talking of Kharkov model of personal counseling, so it is an offshoot of client centered therapy, and it focuses on attending, responding, personalizing and initiating action. So, these are some of the important skills for a person who is counseling with this under this model of personal counseling. Next thing what we have, which is called Gestalt model of counseling. So, here the employee is looked at from a holistic perspective, like not only that portion of the employee which is coming to work, but the employee in different roles that he plays through different days and in different phases of his life, and he is considered as a whole being, and overlap between these roles or the confusions, erosions, whatever is there, and its counseling is done along with the counselee to find out ways so that the counselee is able to play all these roles in a proper way. Next, we have rational emotive behavior therapy. So, it is a practical action oriented approach to coping with problems and enhancing personal growth. So, REBT as it is called places a good amount of focus on the present, that is on currently held attitudes, painful emotions that the person is facing, and maladaptive behaviors. It is one assumption over here is that employees themselves are to certain extent responsible for the negative emotions faced, and because lot depends on their own perception of how they are interpreting certain situations. So, it is assumed in this therapy like the employees themselves are responsible for their own emotions and actions, and the harmful emotions and dysfunctional behaviors are resultant of the employee's own irrational thinking. So, and because the employee is in control of the irrational thinking and like ways of seeing the world. So, he or she is the person who can learn more realistic views of life and with practice change the irrational thought process into a rational way of looking at things and change the negative or the harmful emotions and the dysfunctional behaviors into positive behaviors, which is helpful for both the individual and the organization. So, what as a result like they will see is a deeper acceptance of self and greater satisfaction in life by developing reality based perspective. So, and REBT classifies two very different types of difficulties, which are practical problems and emotional problems. So, based on this, like the flawed behavior, unfair treatment by others and undesirable situations, these are practical problems. So, but again there are emotional problems also, which are like created by unnecessarily seeing things in different ways, by becoming upset about these practical problems. So, instead of seeing the practical problems in objectively, what people may try to do is to get emotional about it and deal with it from an emotional perspective and increase the emotional suffering based on the interpretation of these practical problems. So, what needs to be done over here is try to find out how the employee can view the practical problems and accept it based on a more objective way of looking at things. So, the approach of the counselor should be in this way to help the counselee to see situations more objectively, rather devoid of certain negative emotions, because negative emotions are due to the counselee's own irrational ways of looking at things. Next, we will try to see the some of the things which are very important as a counselor, which they should be possessing, are some important skills which, or a set of attitudes which should be there for the counseling counselor. Is first is respect, a sense of respect for the counselee in whatever condition he or she is. So, respect for the counselee, sense of understanding for the counselee. Next important is sense of sincerity and authenticity with how the counselor deals with the problems, and non-judgmental about the counselee. Try to accept the counselee, try to listen to the problems very objectively what the counselee is sharing. These are very important parts of attitudes required for a counselor. The skills required are, of course, very importantly, are decency skills like warm manners, social etiquettes. Next is important communication skills, and both which consist of nonverbal communication and active listening, also verbal skills. Then looking at things objectively. Next important is maintaining the confidentiality of situations. This is really very important skill of the counselor. Being empathetic. So there is a difference between when you talk of sympathy and empathy. When you're talking of empathy, we are giving due respect to the counselee, and not trying to help the person because the counselee is helpless, and I am having a like sort of superpower as a counselor who can make the employee come out of the problems, which speaks of a power dynamics that I face in mind, like me being more powerful and the counselor less powerful, but it's about giving a same platform of respect to the counselee and trying to listen to the objectively to the counselee's point of view, and also trying to visualize the situation from the counselee's perspective. That is called empathy. Next, what happens? According to Carl Rogers, there are certain core techniques which are called very core for counseling process to be possessed by the counselor. They are ability to structure, like structuring the things, trying to frame it, phrase it as it is happening, trying to find the links between unconnected things, active listening, silence. It's very important to be silent, and because that gives a space for the counselee to speak. So you have to be very active listener, but silence has to be maintained so that the other person can talk. So responding, reflection to particular situations and what the counselor is sharing, and questioning and interpretation. So questioning is one of the very important skills which helps the counselor to know many unknown and untold parts of the problem. So if counselee is not questioned at intervals, then he or she, while sharing things with the counselor, may miss out so many important points. So it's very important, like the counselor asks very important questions at intervals to make the communication continue and find out more facts which could be helpful for diagnosing the problem and arriving at proper solutions. So there are again some important do's and don'ts for the counselor, and these specifically the don'ts have to be very carefully followed. Now when we are talking of the do's and don'ts, like because the way of counseling, the role of counselor is a very challenging role, and if the manager has to play that role, it's further more challenging. So certain because it's further more challenging for a manager to play a counselor's role also if there is no designated counselor as a psychologist who is doing a counseling, because employees may come up with various needs, issues, and they could be in they could be your peers, they could be your subordinates also, and so it's very important in that case to follow the do's and don'ts by the manager. So, and the do's and don'ts then provide the guidelines to the manager about what should be done and what should not be done as the counseling process. So, first important do is counsel the employee behind closed doors. So, because it is very important that the employee is able to speak freely with a free mind about the things that are troubling him or her at that particular point of time. So, it is very important that it is done in a closed door situation. So, next important do is keeping the conversation confidential. So, because the employee is sharing his or her mind with the counselor and the manager, it is very important, like it is kept confidential and should not be used later for any purpose otherwise by the manager. So, taking third important do is taking proper notes of what the employee is sharing about the troubles that he or she is facing at that particular point of time. So, because that will help the counselor to address the situation more objectively. Next important do is do remain objective and not to be sometimes carried away by the emotional situations mentioned by the counselee, but we have to objectively view those situations. Next is do support positive behavior. So, like if you are trying to tell a person about some unproductive behaviors of that person, so first we should tell about some good behaviors and then some unproductive behaviors, and then maybe again like how those can be corrected. So, some sort of sandwich model which helps the employee feel good about themselves and again encourage them to correct the unproductive behavior. Now, some important don'ts are like do not record the conversation because it is unethical to record the conversation without the prior permission of the counselee, because that counselee may be sharing some very private part of his life unknown to others with you as the counselor. Next is do not repeat what has been said, and it is very important not to share with others about the counseling session. Do not get angry. The counselee may also say some attacking words to you, because sometimes projections may happen and the counselee projects the image of his or her boss or the spouse or any target on you and may use some abusive languages or attacking words, but as a counselor we need not get angry about it. Don't gossip about what you have heard about a particular employee's life, because it is really a very painful situation which you are there to provide help to help the employee to come out of that situation. Don't make empty promises that you are not able to keep. That is another of the important things, because if you are not able to provide any help, then just tell it. If you are not able to do some things for the individuals, tell it, but it is not to be made empty promises and not to be kept later on, because that will disturb the level of trust which the employee have on you, and in case of future counseling sessions. So, these are some of the do's and don'ts which have to be followed, particularly by managers who also plays the roles of counselor. Now, we will try to see some of the ethical issues related with the counseling process and psychotherapy. First is fidelity, that is honoring the trust placed in the practitioner. Next is autonomy, respect for the client's right to be self-governing, like it is his or her choice to first is to come to the counselor and accept whatever the counselor is telling, or not to accept certain aspects of it. Beneficence, a commitment to promoting the client's well-being. Non-maleficence, a commitment to avoiding harm to the client. Justice, the fair and impartial treatment of all clients and the provision of adequate services. Self-respect, fostering the practitioner's self-knowledge and care for self. These are some of the important ethical issues in counseling process. Some of the personal moral qualities which are required is empathy, the ability to communicate understanding of another person's experience from that person's perspective. Sincerity, a personal commitment to consistency between what is professed and what is done. Integrity, a commitment to being moral in dealings with others, personal straightforwardness, honesty and coherence. Resilience, the capacity to work with the client's concerns without being personally diminished. So, this is one of the important things again, like we have to separate, as a counselor we have to separate our own self from the counselor's self, so that we can look into the problems objectively, but not get too much like emotionally involved in the process, which disturbs our own well-being and the rational thought process. So, that is very important for us, for the counselors to function properly and dealing with the client's problems. Respect is showing appropriate esteem for others and their understanding of themselves. Humility, the ability to assess accurately and acknowledge one's own strengths and weaknesses. This is also very important. The counselor should know and admit like what his or her limitations are, where he or she need to stop and maybe hand over the case to a more expert person or the appropriate person rather. So, this should be there as one of the moral qualities of a counselor. Competence, the effective deployment of the skills and knowledge needed to do what is required. Fairness, the consistent application of appropriate criteria to inform decisions and actions. Next we have wisdom, possession of sound judgment that informs practice, and next of course is courage, where the capacity to act in spite of known fears, risks and uncertainty. So, you have the courage of telling the truth sometimes. So, even if like there could be pressures from certain corners to do things otherwise, so that depends on the courage of the individual functioning as the counselor. Providing a good standard of practice and care is another of the qualities, ethical qualities required, and it talks of good quality of care. Practitioners should give careful consideration to the limitation of their training and experience and work within these limits, as we have already told, take advantage of available professional support which are there. Good practice involves clarifying and agreeing the rights and responsibilities of both the practitioner and the client as appropriate points in their working relationship. So, dual relationships, like when the client is also the trainee and colleagues and supervisee, these may have certain overlapping roles, and what the counselor has to do may be to look at each of these roles separately and not mix them up together. Counselors should be keeping appropriate records of their work with clients, unless there is no adequate reason for not keeping records. So, and all records should be kept accurate, which are respectful for the clients and colleagues, and they should be protected from unauthorized disclosure. So, clients are entitled to competently delivered services, and it is very important, like the practitioner reviews from time to time, and what is the outcome of the things suggested to the counselee, like whether it has led to any improvement or not. Maintaining competent practice, so they should, like every counselor, psychotherapist should undergo a review of and formal supervision of their work with their professional requirements. So, it is important, like they check on their own skills and they keep themselves updated of different happenings, improve their own counseling skills to help people in much better way. So, it is very important, as we already shared, to monitor one's own work and take feedback from the colleagues and others about it. So, like we have told, like they should be keeping updated about the latest knowledge and their own need for continuing professional development. So, practitioners also, this is very important, they should be aware of any legal requirements concerning their work, and they should be very clear about the legal accountability of their practice. Keeping trust of the counselee is very important. So, they have to be attentive to the quality of listening and respect offered to clients, careful attention to clients' consent and confidentiality about the problems shared, courteousness in the behavior, these are very important things. So, clients should be informed, well informed about the nature of services being offered. So, it's very, they have to be ensure that it's the counseling process is taking place due to the client's explicit consent about the thing, and the client is not being forced into the counseling process. So, situations in which the client may pose a risk of causing serious harm to themselves or others are challenging situations, and then the counselor should raise an alarm about these situations and make people alert about it. So, like when counseling young people, it's very much required to keep a balance between young people's dependence on adults and careers and towards a progressive development towards acting independently. So, again repeatedly we are talking of confidentiality, because we should not, we as a counselor should not be sharing information and protect information from sensitive information from unauthorized disclosure. So, practitioners should be willing to respond to their clients' request for information about how they are working and how they have, and any assessment they have made about it. So, important points is like the clients should not be taken, like the practitioner should not abuse their client's trust, in other words speaking, in order to gain sexual, emotional, financial or any kind of personal advantage. Sexual relations with clients are prohibited. So, it's a purely professional relationship, and the practitioner should not allow their professional relationships to be overshadowed by any personal views that they may hold about the lifestyle, gender, age, disability, sexual orientations, beliefs or culture about the clients. So, practitioners should be very clear about their commitment to the clients and colleagues and honor their commitments. Based on this discussion, we will now have a look into the questions like define stress, describe an organizational stress model with special emphasis on organizational role stress, what are stress outcomes, describe the moderators of stress, explain with examples stress prevention and management techniques, what is employee counseling, what are the types of counseling, what are the do's and don'ts of counseling, what are the ethical principles of counseling and psychotherapy, what are the moral qualities required of a counselor, describe with suitable examples. We hope, like after this discussion on the session on stress and counseling, it helps us to understand better the employees, the situations in the workplace, what makes them more stressful, try to prevent those things if possible, and if it has already taken place and the situation is stressful, the processes of counseling, the do's and don'ts of counseling will help us to be equipped as more as a future manager to provide help to the people with the sole purpose of making them come out of those situations or making the people more equipped to face situation in a more rational way, interpret things in a new light and adjust with their own life situations, be happy in their own life situations and in their family situations, and be good and asset for the organization and lead to own personal growth. Thank you.